My name is PJ Cullen, and I'm a founder and chief scientist at PlasmaLeap Technologies. PlasmaLeap Technologies is a startup company that is aiming to electrify the chemical industry. Plasma is really an excited gas, so we're using electricity in order to do gas conversions. And there's a number of gases that basically run the world. We have nitrogen, oxygen, CO2 and methane, and we play with those gases in order to get products that we need, such as fertilizer. There's actually many problems with fertilizer, one being price security and supply security. So we see these fluctuations in the product, and we saw in particular obviously with COVID, and that in turn then is passed on to the consumer. So prices obviously have to increase of food. So that's one issue, and that concerns primarily the farmer and the consumer of the food. The second issue is sustainability. So the current way of manufacturing of the product releases huge amounts of CO2. So it's a fossil fuel dependent process. So loads of CO2 being released, and it doesn't need to be that way because we actually just have nitrogen, which is all around us. And there's a third issue with it in that it's centralized, and that means basically it's manufactured close to where there's cheap fossil fuels, and then we ship it around the world. And as a product, that in turn gives rise to loads and loads of extra emissions, in particular around 1% of global emissions, because the volume of product that we're shipping is very, very large. And on top of that, there's a potential for it to actually explode, and we saw it with Beirut, for example. So plasma is an excited gas. So the stars, lightning, all of these are basically gas, which has been so excited that it gives off light. For us, we really want to create that in an enclosed environment, in particular inside of these reactors. But ultimately, you can think of it as electricity passing through a gas and then exciting that gas and creating this chemistry that we want. When we think of chemistry and how we make chemistry, everyone thinks of it, you get this vision of large plants and chimneys, for example. And that's because in order to make it, you really need to be close to places where you have cheap natural gas, for example, and you need lots of pressure and lots of temperature. But it doesn't need to be like that. If we take an alternative route and we use plasma or electrification, that means then we can actually move away from that big, massive behemoth of manufacturing, and we create it much more locally. And there's huge advantages to do that. Part of it is how we integrate it within the electrical grid, but also in terms of actually transport and supply security of the product. For fertilizer in particular, it's extremely important that we don't charge extra for the product. So if we do, that ultimately has to be passed on to the consumer in terms of food pricing. So our model is to be comparable, but actually charge less for the product to the farmer. So when the farmer signs up to the agreement, they're getting their nitrogen supply at 10% less than the current market price of the incumbent, which is things like urea. Well, plasma itself is obviously exciting by its nature, and people like it because you have this electrification and you have light, but really it's the impact. There's a potential for not just solving end user problems. It's actually potentially win-win for lots of different sectors, and it can impact the people. So we see people like the end users, people who are actually consumers of food, for example, but even electricity itself. So one of the big problems with variable renewable electricity is that it's variable. So if we build technologies that are electrified, the potential exists actually to stabilize that grid and allow expansion of variable renewable energy. So when I look at technologies such as ours, I can see multiple wins across multiple different sectors.